But we begin with the latest from our nation's capital. We have United States Senator Roger Wicker down here on the coast and joining us on this Sunday morning. Senator, thanks for being with us.
Glad to be with you.
A very general question right off the bat for you. How would you characterize the differences in the Senate since Republicans seized the majority this year, and more specifically, the differences between Mitch McConnell, the current Senate Majority Leader, and the former leader, Harry Reid?
Well, previous conversations you and I have had, your expectations of Leader McConnell were a little bit low.
Really?
I would have to say that if you approve of bipartisanship and moving, I think the American people by now should have noticed a change for the better. So we have actually had over 185 votes on amendments this year. We had 15 votes on amendments all of last year under Harry Reid.
Well,
so if you believe the American people ought to be able to see how their elected senators stand on these issues, it's a good thing to have these votes. It's a good thing to move them out of committee with bipartisan support.
It's interesting that you should say that, because that's one thing I have noticed. I was expecting a lot more acrimony between the administration and the House and the Senate, but it seems to have toned down in the past 6 months as to even what it was previous when the House and the Senate were controlled by the Democrats.
I think divided government is actually a good time to get things done. This happened in the Clinton administration when we passed welfare reform.
Even Ronald Reagan?
Right, Ronald Reagan with tax reform. Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan got together and moved something major. I mean, there were problems there. But the fact is, we don't get things done in the Senate, except for the budget, where it takes a majority. Everywhere else, you have to have 60 votes. And so when, for example, on the Iranian nuclear deal, when the committee comes out strong, Republican and Democrat, and says, whatever you negotiate, Mr. President, we want to look at this, and we want to look at it in writing. To me, it sends a strong message, I think, to the American people that the Senate is working on their behalf. Before this deal becomes official, Republicans and Democrats want to look at it.
Well,
and we have the same with education. We have the same with trade negotiation.
Immigration as well. And I'm curious, you talk about these. The president has taken some heat, but there are a lot of people who have also supported him on this. With all of these executive actions, and a lot of folks are worried that the separation of power in the Constitution is being threatened by Congress being taken out of the loop through all these executive actions. What's your view on that?
I worry about that. And the point I would make is there are not enough federal courts to go to challenge all of the examples of executive overreach that this administration has done. We've won almost every time we've gone to court, whether on immigration or the NLRB, the overreach there. The Supreme Court rules in our favor that the president has gone too far. But frankly, I would much prefer an administration that had a little more deference to the separation of powers that we've always honored.
One decision that he also made, and I want to get your take on it, is the decision to normalize relations with Cuba. What do you think of that decision, and is that a good thing to happen, having normal relations with somebody that's 90 miles to our south?
Well, in a vacuum, it is. But the fact of the matter is that the Castro regime still exports terrorism in our hemisphere. Fidel Castro and his brother now, who's pretty much in charge, I mean, they haven't made any steps in the right direction. So my question is, if this were a reward for some sort of change on the part of the Castro regime, that might be one thing. But to say that in light of everything they're doing and their constant effort to foment strife in South America and Central America, what has changed to make the Castro regime deserve
plus they have a horrible
treatment?
Human rights record in their
Will
own
Congress
country.
scuttle those plans, do you think?
I don't think we'll be able to, frankly.
Yeah, I think the horse is out of the barn.
But I think it's sort of like Nixon going to China. Once that decision has been made, I think we're going to have to try to work with it. But I am concerned. I would not have done it, and I think it sends the wrong signal to a rogue regime that hasn't improved. Let's hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Let's hope that human rights gets better and they start playing better with their neighboring countries. That has not happened.
Let's talk about the Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL, goes by so many different names, it's hard to keep track. They're marching through Iraq, took Ramadi over the weekend. Defense Secretary Ash Carter said basically that they don't have the will to fight over there. I don't think Americans, and Congress doesn't seem to have a taste for ground troops going into the area. So what in the world can be done to stop this menace?
The sad thing is we didn't have to get to this point. I think the crucial mistake President Obama made, he was so eager to say he had withdrawn all troops from Iraq that he didn't listen to his generals and he didn't listen to the people on the ground who knew what they were talking about. Our troops were pretty much out of combat. And what we needed to do was negotiate a status of forces agreement. That's the excuse the president used. We couldn't get this done with the Maliki regime. And so he withdrew the troops, I think prematurely. Had he left them there, I think we would have had a stabilizing force and we wouldn't have seen ISIS. Now they're there, and basically they're trying to set up an Islamic country and doing a pretty good job of it.
In Syria too, not just Iraq.
Well, right, Syria and Iraq and
Yemen.
We cannot allow them to do this. I mean, it affects our national interest.
All right, Roger Wicker, we've got to take a break.
The boots on the ground with the United States, let me say, that's not going to happen.
No.
But we can make sure that we actually beat ISIS, and we've got to do it because it's in our vital national interest.
All right, Senator Roger Wicker, got to take a break. We'll be back and talk with you.
And welcome back to WLOX News This Week. Thanks for staying with us. Our guest again for this segment, United States Senator Roger Wicker. We're going to go ahead and start with Doug Walker.
Hi, Dave. Thank you. Senator, thanks again for joining us. I want to get back to Iraq, Afghanistan. You and I had a conversation years ago, and it wasn't on the record. We were talking somewhere, and I said, you know, once we leave Iraq and Afghanistan, it will revert back to what it was before, because these people have been killing each other for 10,000 years, and we're not going to stop it. And it looks like that prediction is coming true.
Well, you know, we never left Korea. We're not fighting in Korea there for decades, but our stabilizing force has kept the peace. We're not fighting in Germany and France and in Western Europe anymore. And those people fought each other for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of years. So the point is, we didn't have to keep fighting there. The surge had worked in Iraq, and the situation was at a point where we could go forward. And frankly, I think the president, as commander-in-chief, threw away our gains. Now, we have an opportunity in Afghanistan not to do that. And I think we've learned our painful lesson from Iraq and Syria and ISIS. I think we've learned that in Afghanistan, and we will not totally abandon. We won't be fighting in Afghanistan for a long time, but as long as we have a follow-on force there will not be war. And so I think you were correct that the moment we completely pulled out, yes, things were going to erupt into chaos there in Iraq, but it didn't have to happen because our troops had won the day and established a peace. We just threw it away.
Yeah, well, we want to talk about some issues that affect South Mississippi, but I just want to continue along that line. The last 10 days or so, there's been a big debate over blaming President Bush for originally going into Iraq in 2003 and President Obama pulling out in 2011. And an argument could be made that when we took Saddam Hussein out of power is actually when we created this vacuum, not when we pulled troops out in 2011.
Argument could be made, and a lot of arguments can be made. I'm glad Saddam Hussein is gone. Saddam Hussein had attacked us once before, attacked our ally once before, and I think we were eventually going to have to deal with him. But I think it is clear, and almost everyone agrees, that the situation in Iraq was stabilized, and President Obama was just too anxious to get out and take credit for a withdrawal. I wish we could turn back the clock, but we can't.
Something was talked about a lot a year ago, and then it's just kind of disappeared off the table, and that is the $17 trillion deficit that this country is facing with.
Debt.
Or debt, rather. You just
the national debt, the accumulation of
right. You don't hear about
it.
it as much as you did a year and a half ago. What's happened with that? We still have this debt that's wringing us.
And about to be $20 trillion.
Very, very troubling. Well, what we've done in Congress, House and Senate, which is the only thing the Senate can do with a straight majority vote, we have passed a 10-year balanced budget. Now, it aspires to a balanced budget in 10 years. Whether we get there will depend on the 2016 presidential election, the 2016 congressional and Senate elections. But it sets a plan to get us to a balanced budget within 10 years. So that's the answer to it. It requires some tough decisions, and it requires also policies that make our economy grow over time. So not only can we be careful about our expenditures, but we're bringing in more revenue through economic growth. But that's the answer this spring to the $18 trillion.
Well, the tough decision is going to be entitlement reform, Social Security, Medicare, and that's never going to happen. So,
well, let me challenge that. And, let me take 20 seconds.
No one wants to take that.
Well, I do. I want to challenge it as well. It's not. Social Security is not an entitlement. Neither is Medicare. Those are paid for by the American taxpayers. I mean,
I'll be glad to referee this debate between Doug and Dave.
It is an entitlement.
But let me say this. It's an entitlement in that we've paid in and we are legally entitled to get it. But here's the point. You don't have to cut Medicare. You don't have to cut Medicaid. You don't have to cut Social Security. We simply have to restrain the growth rate. Those programs are growing 3 times, 4 times the rate of the economy. And if we could just make the tough decisions to make them grow at the same level as the economy, we can balance the budget without cutting any of these programs.
1 minute
We're not
left.
going to cut Medicare.
1 minute
We're not
left,
going to
Senator.
cut Social Security.
Let's talk about the Flying Jennies, the Hurricane Hunters, staying at Keesler. That was a major victory.
It was.
As well as with the 815. Tell us your take on those.
Well, we were able to make the case. Let me say, it's a great team that we have working. Senator Cochran, as Appropriations Chairman, obviously people listen to him. Stephen Palazzo last year was on the Defense Committee. Now he's moved to the Appropriations Committee. I'm Chairman of the Sea Power Subcommittee now on the Armed Services Committee. So we were in a position to make the case that losing these C-130Js was not going to save money for the taxpayer. And so we asked them to get back to us with a study and show us that this would indeed save money. They were unable to show that it would make much difference from a budget standpoint. And based on that, the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force called us up and said, we have decided to keep the C-130Js here. I'll be back to referee the debate between you.
It is an entitlement.
It's only been going on for 25 years, and no, it's not.
Yeah. All righty. Well, thank you so much, Senator.